Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Not Minding My Own Business. I am honored to be welcoming back Anne Desjardins to our show. If you remember, Anne was here, I can't believe it, but I think it was about 6 months ago, and she has agreed to come back and talk to us about some tick tips. And again, I am Russell Farbiars, your estate planning and elder law attorney, and your host for Not Minding My Own Business. And Anne, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here again. I was looking forward to it.
Wonderful, wonderful. I was saying to you before we started, I can't believe it's been 6 months since you were here on the show, but time flies, I guess.
It sure does, especially when you're having fun.
That's right. That's right. So, last time you were on, we talked a lot about you and about the work that you're doing with Lyme disease. Before we jump into some tick tips, is there any updates on things that are going on with you that you want to share with our listeners?
I guess really ultimately I've really come almost full circle with my healing, which I'm very grateful for. In December, I got an update. I had some other health challenges, I think, because my immune system was so suppressed from the tick-borne illness that I had some cervical cancer scares and things going along those lines due to HPV. And gratefully, that's completely out of my system now. And I'm just so thankful. That's such a huge sigh of relief. And I feel like in the last 10 months in particular, I've really been honing in on the importance of replacing and repairing my friendly gut bacteria, the bacteria in my body, to be able to give my immune system the ability to suppress things on its own. Like, I've been trying so hard to kill that HPV in my body forever, right? And like with the tick-borne illness, dropping all these bombs on it to kill. And ultimately, I think what the shift was most beneficial was, again, replacing the friendly gut bacteria and working on that. So that's been huge for me. And that's been something that's come along with more of my Ayurvedic studies, which is something else I've branched off into. So because of the tick-borne illness.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that those were just scares, and that you're healthy and that you're healed. So that's wonderful news. So why don't we dive in, and what we were going to talk about today are what you call tick tips. So what are your tick tips?
Gosh, it's like, where do I even begin? So I think for the users or listeners, what I'd really want you to understand is to think logically about this, right? There's a couple things that we can do, just like putting on sunscreen. For example, when you go outside, you take the time to put on some type of a repellent. Your choice on whether you would prefer chemicals or natural repellents. I go back and forth, and I think it also depends on more the environment that I'm going into. Again, technically no environment is safe, and that's what we have to just think about. They're so small, they're everywhere, but I feel that some areas are going to be more prone to having a lot more ticks than others. And if I'm going into long grass or the woods, something like this, I'm definitely going to probably more opt for chemicals, although I know they're not good for us. And so then also you want to take the time to be more cautious in what you wear. Wear long pants, tuck the pants into your socks. You want to wear long sleeves, light colored clothing so you could see the ticks crawling on you. 2 years ago, I actually found a tick, sadly, on my arm. Despite all the stuff that I do, I still came in contact with one, but I felt like it was a lot lighter in color than what I remember. But again, they're just so small. So, but the light color clothing would help you to be able to see them more readily. Pull your hair back, wear a hat. You want to, again, spray, and you can get clothing that's pre-treated with permethrin, especially if you're a hunter or you're someone who is an avid gardener, outdoor person. You can go ahead at, say, like Dick's, or you can buy actual permethrin and spray it onto your clothing. I will just caution you, it is toxic, especially when wet to cats. I mean, it's a chemical, so you just want to make sure your cat does not come into contact with wet permethrin. It's very bad for them. And you can read up more about that specifically. But putting permethrin on your shoes and socks gives you, I think, 70 times the prevention protection than just having nothing at all. That's pretty huge. And I've seen some other good things that people are doing where they'll put duct tape around the bottom half of your leg. So because ticks live in the grass, generally speaking, that's where they're going to come from, is down the lower 5 feet of our environment. So they're going to be crawling from the bottom up. And so if you can do that duct tape type of thing around your bottom of your legs, again, you'll catch them typically before they're crawling up to attach onto our bodies. They're going to be looking for a safe space to hide out. And typically that's going to be an area that you might not see so readily, behind your ears, along the hairline, your armpits, belly button, along any type of fabric contact that we have with our skin, where your pants are around your waist, bra lines. And you know, it's kind of crazy, but there is no safe space from a tick. I've talked to quite a few people who have pulled them out of their private parts. So make sure that you're checking that area as well diligently. The backs of your legs, between your toes, and you want to get in the habit of doing this every day. The faster that you find a tick, the better chances that you have of not contracting tick-borne illness. There really seems to be no general consensus on how long it takes for transmission to occur. I've seen things, they say, I think Powassan virus can be transmitted in as little as 15 minutes. This causes hemorrhagic fever, at worst case scenario, fatality. You don't want to come into contact with that one in particular. And so again, the sooner you find the tick on you, the less chance that you have of it transmitting something to you. There's a lot of things to think about as well with the tick itself. There's many different kinds of ticks, but what had popped into my head was, especially with hunters, when you're out there, if you kill a deer, I saw a video once, a scientist filmed it of her brother. He hung a deer in the garage to let it drain out and do its thing, to prepare it to harvest it. And all the ticks started just dropping off the deer because they want a warm blood supply, right? They don't want something that's dead. So what's going to be the next closest live meal if that thing's hanging in your garage? You. And so you don't really want to be doing that kind of thing, obviously. But when a tick is mid-feed and it falls off or gets disattached and then reattaches to something else, transmission time is sped up because it's already regurgitating this contents of its stomach, which is where the tick-borne illness lies. And then it just can put it into your body faster. So you really want to be mindful about situations like that. Again, as I said, there's so many different types of ticks. Certain ones are going to be more susceptible to carrying certain types of illness. In ticks, their lifespan is generally 2 years. What occurs is they go through different life cycles. When they're born, they're nymphal state, and they usually will feed on a small rodent, and that's where they're going to contract the Lyme disease. They're not necessarily born with it, although they're starting to find ticks that are actually now born with it. But most of the time, what's going to happen is they're going to feed on a white-footed mouse in particular, or maybe like a chipmunk, little bird, something like this. And that's where it picks up the Lyme. And then it transforms, it morphs into its next life stage. And then, you know, they're super duper tiny. And then they will feed again and turn into an adult. And they can usually last over one winter. But a lot of the problem with ticks now is that they're not dying off over the winter. So winters used to be, I feel, much colder than they are now continuously. And we don't necessarily get to those cold temperatures constantly any longer, that it really is depleting their population. But also, I've talked to scientists who have done tests on ticks, and one in particular, she's one of the top tick researchers, put, I think she said, 3 ticks into something ungodly cold, like negative 130 degrees. And she put them in there, and 2 or 3 days later, she pulled them out expecting them to be dead. And sadly, they started crawling around again. So it's almost like they're evolving, I guess, and their reach has gone much further north. I see a lot more of it in Canada. I have a lot of friends up there, unfortunately, that are starting to see them, you know, regularly. That didn't used to occur. And so they're getting smarter. They are finding them a lot more in coastal regions too. There's one called the Lone Star tick, and it's not necessarily because it's from Texas, but it has a white star pattern on its back. That tick is actually a hunter tick, where it will actively hunt you and come after you. It can sense you from like 25 yards away. They sense our body heat and our vibrations, the emissions that we make as humans. That's how they find us. And animals, you know, they're not necessarily hunting solely people. But that tick can actually give you alpha-gal allergy, which maybe you've heard about this on the news. This will be an allergy to red meats. So if suddenly you're not able to tolerate red meats, you might want to consider that possibly you got bit by this tick. And as far as I understand, it's an intolerance for the rest of your life. It's some type of reaction with the proteins in your blood and how the meat interacts with that. And I hope to God I never get that one, because I do enjoy my meat. But I mean, there's just so many different symptoms that the tick-borne illnesses can present to you. And that's the other thing. I mean, gosh, there's just so much I can talk to you about with this, but ticks, again, they can give you more than just one type of sickness as well. And that's, I think, a common misnomer. People are like, oh, Lyme disease, you're going to take your antibiotics and off you go and be on your way. Well, I never heard of Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichiosis, cytomegalovirus. It can reactivate Epstein-Barr virus. It can do all kinds of things that you're not necessarily, I think, most of the time conscious of. Again, I mentioned Powassan virus, all these other things that they actually carry. There was a study released in Pennsylvania that said 1 out of 2 ticks that they tested had 2 or more tick-borne illnesses. That's 50%. That's 1 out of 2 ticks out of like 18,000 ticks that they tested. That's a little bit concerning, and we need to be a little bit, again, mindful of the fact that it is more than just Lyme disease that you can get from it. You're not always going to get a bullseye rash. Only 35% of people, possibly, that's maybe a high estimate, get the arrhythmia migrans rash, that typical bullseye. And a lot of times it doesn't necessarily present as just one. I've seen incidents where maybe they have 9 different little spots on their body. And it's like, no, you didn't necessarily get bit by 9 ticks. That's just how it's morphing out into your system. You know, again, if you treat it, generally speaking, right away, at least 70% of people will recover with no long-term problems. But it's those people that it goes under the radar. I will express this in that the standard 2-tier testing, the Western ELISA and the Western blot and the ELISA testing are generally 50%, maybe 50 to 65% accurate, which is very scary for a standard diagnostic test that we're going to rely upon to tell us whether we have been infected or not. But there's a whole other plethora of reasons why that test is not a good tool. Sometimes Lyme can hide. It has a biofilm. It's not detected in the bloodstream that day. It comes and goes. It's like a living organism. Sometimes it's very rampant in the body, and other days it's not as active. And so the levels just might not be high enough to catch it. When you're first infected, your body's not responding to it right away because it's not such a strong trigger of your immune system like that reaction, right, where like with the flu, yeah, you got sick right away. This is more of a under the radar type of sickness, unfortunately, and that can be, again, why it makes it so hard. But back to the tick thing. So if you are going outside, some things to keep in mind. As I mentioned earlier, they like things like willowy grass, because what do ticks do? They crawl up, they quest, you know, they crawl to the edge of something and they just wait there, usually patiently, for their meal to come along. And then they're just going to latch on when something brushes past them and off they go. And then that whole cycle begins where they start to feed upon you. Many times I think people are they think that they're going to find them. Like they think they're like the size of an ant. Again, I can't stress enough that they are so small. And when they bite you, they emit or they secrete a numbing agent, so you don't feel them. That's the other thing about it. It's like you think you're going to feel something biting you. No, sadly, they're really smart again. And so that's why it's important to get in the habit of checking your body every day, just to see if they're there. But stay in the middle of trails if you're going out hiking. Try your best to avoid long, willowy things. At your home, you want to open up your property with as much sunlight as possible. They like moisture. They're going to hang out in like dead leaf matter or dead wood. They like stone walls, things that retain the moisture. For kids, like wood swing sets can be kind of bad. Like wood park benches, they like to stay on the underside of those, unfortunately. So you want to, again, be very careful if you're sitting outside to thoroughly check yourself. If you have kids and you have a swing set, they make special mulches and different products that you can put underneath that will help to repel them. There's what is it, yellow Atlantic cedar mulch bits that you can use, and that again is a really good way to put a natural barrier outside. I'd recommend putting that under the kids swing set. Put that thing in the sun. I know maybe you're thinking, oh, I'll put them in the shade, it'll be nicer for them, but like actually that again is a better place and chance for them to come into contact. Kids, unfortunately, are the highest hit population, and it makes perfect sense because they're the ones that are spending much of their time outside in the tick environment, like that 5 feet or lower. That's where the kids are hanging out.
Yeah.
And so you have to be extra vigilant with them. They make wearable devices that you can use too that emit vibrations or frequencies that kids can wear, like bracelets, or they do the other insect repellent stickers. You can put some of those on you too. If you're gardening, again, just be very vigilant. Make sure you're wearing a hat. People are like, oh, they're not in my yard, they're in the woods. That's definitely not a very good thought in your head either. Just make sure you're aware that they are everywhere.
No, they're in your yard. I once had them, jump off a tree.
Yeah. And again, you want to think that they're not so much that way, but like birds carry them. So clearly that can fall out of the tree. Who is in the tree? The birds and the squirrels and all the other little critters that carry.
Now, what you said you go back and forth between chemical sprays and natural sprays. What is some natural, non-chemical way, sprays or concoctions that you can use?
Sure, there's one that I really love called TikTok Naturals, and I would say she's got probably lemongrass. It's more of a citrus-based one. There's things like I have another one for my dog. It's got, my brain is blanking, lavender, eucalyptus. You've got to be careful, like with animals, which ones that you buy, but there's tons that are available. Most of them are going to be essential oil based, and I apologize on my head, not like my brain's blanking a little bit, but you can also do like tick repelling plants, rosemary, wormwood. There's tons of different things that you can plant in your yard also that will help to keep them out of your space. But yeah, if you just Google that, but the TikTok Naturals, I absolutely love that one. I wear that a lot. And then, I got a different collar. They have these other things that you can actually wear as a person. They're like a pendant, and it does make a frequency that supposedly repels fleas and ticks. I have one on my dog now, but people can wear them too, and they last about 6 to 9 months. So I carry one on my keychain. It gives you a 5 foot barrier, basically, or perimeter that they supposedly won't come into contact with you. That's, I think, called Sonic Guard, if I remember right, and you can buy it. Dr. Judy, God, my brain is, that's one thing that sometimes I'm not sure if it's just how I'm wired or from the tick borne illness that still, but like proper names sometimes just don't stick in my head. Maybe it's Dr. Judy Morgan. She's one of the top holistic vets, but that's how I found that. So.
And then if you're going the chemical route, what are the chemicals that are the best to use?
I would say the Off Deep Woods is really good. It has DEET in it. But again, that's a pretty strong chemical. But it's supposedly okay to put onto your skin. I usually try to just put it on my clothing and just spray very heavily on the outside of my clothes. Try not to get it into my mouth or really breathe it in. And then permethrin is another one that you can use, and that's available at Dick's or any of those type of sporting goods stores. I bet Bass Pro Shops would probably have that. And then, like I said, they make clothing that's already treated that you can wash, I think, up to about 20 times before you'd have to retreat it again.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff out there that to use. It's just a matter of being mindful as if you're going to go into the woods, into tall grasses, you just really need to protect yourself.
Yes, and again, like I said, it's not just those places, but you want to be extra vigilant in those spaces. And in Pennsylvania, let's be real, how many deer are hopping around? It's not the deer's fault. They're just a taxi for the tick. But like in my backyard, I've got a pretty small property, but I've got piles of deer poo. My bushes have been decimated. Like they're just destroying the neighborhoods and they just roam around. And I live in a very residential place. So that is part of the problem. And it's not the deer's fault because they're getting eaten by the ticks too, but they just bring a lot more activity of that, unfortunately. So you really have to be careful outside and take the time to set your property up for success. Something else that I didn't talk about yet, but you can get tick tubes for your property. They sell them at Home Depot. You can make your own tick tubes. You just keep the core of paper towel or toilet paper roll, get some cotton, spray it with the permethrin, stick it in the tube, and what'll happen then, you put it out where your little rodent friends like to hang out, and they pull that out and make their nest out of it. And so it doesn't hurt the rodent, but it kills the ticks. And so it's just one way to get ahead of the life cycle with the ticks.
And you mentioned before that you wear this device that emits a frequency. Tell me a little bit more about how that actually works. Is there a frequency that the ticks don't like? Is that how that works?
Yes, I'm gonna try to see if I can't Google this really fast, because I had found it before and then I kind of forgot about it and I went back to the chemicals. So I put Seresto on Ollie. And then I get nervous, like I don't even want to like touch him around his neck, and it's not like that's so bad. Like the poor thing, I don't want him to be touching this thing either. So I love him. I want to do my best to take care of him, but let's see here. What is it telling me? This is one that's similar to it, but it says emits a high frequency sound designed to keep fleas and ticks at bay. Non-toxic devices free from odors and chemicals. Simply secures to your pet's collar. So I guess I don't know if it's not really giving me.
It's just interesting. I never would have thought of that, but I guess that there would be maybe sounds or frequencies, and maybe they can hear things that we can't hear.
Yeah, for sure. And that I just wish I had the box with me. I'm sorry. Like I put that on him a little while ago, and then I use in conjunction with that, I do the natural spray I got for him. So
okay. Wonderful. Well, well, thank you for coming back and telling us all about how we can stay safe now as we're here in the Pennsylvania area, where we're hopefully getting into spring, warmer weather coming up. If any of our listeners have additional questions for you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
You can, however you like. You can go onto social media. I'm on Facebook under my name, Anne Desjardins. You can message me there if you like. You can email me. My email is my first and last name, ANNEDESJARDINS15 at gmail.com. I tried to be the only one, but someone else stole that. And you can call me if you want, 484-769-2405, whatever's easiest for you. And if you're also struggling with Lyme and tick-borne illness and you're just looking for some guidance, feel free to reach out to me. That's something else that I do help counsel people with, is maybe get a little bit of a better understanding of what's going on and a game plan of how to help yourself heal.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Anne, for being here for our listeners.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Russell. This is very important information.
Absolutely.
Thank you.